The thud came through my headphones like someone dropped a sack of wet cement on a concrete floor. Then my wife whispered 4 words I will hear until the day I die. Mason, he's not stopping. Behind her voice, a man was breathing the way animals breathe before they kill something. And then the line went dead. I was 30,000 feet over the Atlantic. My pregnant wife was bleeding on a kitchen floor in Texas, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment on your city or country below. My name is Mason. I was 31 years old, 6 years into a Navy contracting job out of Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and up until 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, I thought I had the kind of life other men quietly envied. A wife who still texted me good morning after 4 years of marriage. A baby girl on the way, 26 weeks along. Already had a name picked out, Ivy. We argued about it for 2 months before Tessa won. The way she always won, with that small tilt of her head, and the way she'd say, "Trust me on this one." I always trusted her on that one. I was somewhere over Greenland when the voicemail came in. I'd been dead asleep in seat 14C, head tilted against the cold plastic window, dreaming about nothing in particular. My phone was on airplane mode, but the in-flight Wi-Fi was running, and the second the cabin lights flickered, my watch buzzed against my wrist. 1 missed call. Tessa, 2:47 a.m. her time, 9:47 a.m. mine. She never called this late. Tessa was a 6 o'clock in the morning with chamomile tea kind of woman. If she was calling at almost 3 o'clock in the morning, something was wrong. I sat up so fast the guy next to me grunted. I plugged my earbuds in, pulled up the voicemail, and pressed play with a thumb that was already shaking. The first 3 seconds were just breathing. Hers. Fast. Too fast. Then her voice, small, the way a child's voice gets when they're trying not to be heard. Mason, he's here. He's drunk. He's saying things about the baby. There was a crash. Glass, I think. Maybe a lamp. Maybe a plate. Then a man's voice, low and ugly, and so familiar it made my stomach turn inside out. You ungrateful little Victor. Her father. The voicemail cut off right there. 22 seconds. That was it. 22 seconds of my wife's life I'd been asleep through. I called her back. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called her sister, Harper. Voicemail. I called the house phone, the landline Tessa kept hooked up in the kitchen because her grandmother gave it to her. And it rang 16 times before I hung up. 16 rings, and nobody picked up in a house where my wife was supposed to be. I unbuckled. The flight attendant, older woman, kind eyes, name tag said Daphne, was halfway down the aisle with a coffee pot when I grabbed her wrist a little harder than I meant to. Ma'am, I need to know how long until we land. She blinked at me. Sir, we still have about 4.5 hours until Dallas. Are you my wife's in trouble? I need to make a call. Real call. Not Wi-Fi. Sir, I can't. She's pregnant. Please. Something in my face must have shifted because Daphne didn't say another word. She walked me up to the galley, picked up the cabin phone, dialed something I couldn't see, and handed me the receiver. I called 911 in Fort Worth. I gave them my address. I told them what I'd heard. The dispatcher's voice was calm in a way that made me want to put my fist through the wall. Sir, we'll send a unit. Can you stay on the line? I'm on a plane over the ocean, ma'am. I can't stay on anything. She told me to call back in 20 minutes. I sat in the galley jump seat with my head in my hands and counted the seconds out loud. Daphne brought me water. I didn't drink it. I called Harper again. This time she picked up on the second ring, and the second I heard her voice I knew. Mason! She was crying, not loud, the quiet kind. The kind women cry when they've already been crying for a while. Mason, you need to come home. Harper, where is she? Baylor. They took her to Baylor about an hour ago. Mason. Her voice cracked clean in half. The baby. They don't know about the baby yet. They're doing surgery right now. Mason. He Harper. He kicked her, Mason, in the stomach. He kicked her, and he wouldn't stop, and the neighbors heard her screaming, and I don't remember saying anything after that. I remember the phone in my hand. I remember Daphne's face. I remember the hum of the engines under my feet. The way the floor was vibrating. The way my whole body felt like it had gone numb from the inside out. My wife. My pregnant wife. Lying on a kitchen floor while her own father kicked our daughter out of her. And me, useless. Somewhere over a frozen ocean, for hours away from being a man who could do anything about it. I should have seen it coming. That's the part that's been eating me alive ever since. I should have seen it the first Thanksgiving I went to their house. When Victor made Tessa cry over the way she sliced the turkey, and not one of his 6 grown sons said a single word. I should have seen it when she flinched the first time I raised my hand too fast to scratch my ear. I should have seen it in the way she'd go quiet every time her father's name came up, the way her shoulders would climb up toward her ears like she was bracing for weather only she could feel. She told me once 2 years ago, lying in bed in the dark, "My dad's just old-fashioned, Mason. He doesn't mean it." And I'd believed her because I wanted to believe her, because believing her was easier than believing what was actually true. The seatbelt light came on, turbulence. Daphne walked me back to my seat, hand on my shoulder the whole way, the way you'd walk a man to a funeral. I sat down. I buckled up. I stared at the seat back in front of me, and somewhere in the middle of the worst 4 hours of my life, a thought slid into my head and sat down next to me like it had always been there. If that baby doesn't make it, I'm going to bury him. Not metaphorically. I didn't know yet about the recordings on her phone. I didn't know yet about the storage unit, or the lawyer, or the sealed envelope with my name on it. I didn't know yet that Victor had 6 sons standing behind him, and that one of them, the youngest, was about to knock on my motel room door at midnight, holding a shoebox full of 30 years of secrets. All I knew at 30,000 feet over a black ocean was that my wife had whispered my name into a phone like it was the last word she'd ever say. And the man who put her on that floor was going to be smiling at me in a hospital lobby in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, holding flowers. The pilot's voice came over the intercom somewhere around hour 2. Something about headwinds, something about an arrival time pushed back by 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I closed my eyes and did the math on what 20 minutes could cost a woman bleeding internally, and I had to grip the armrest until my fingers went white, just to keep from screaming inside that pressurized metal tube. The woman in 14B was watching me. I could feel it. Mid-50s, gray cardigan, paperback novel open on her lap that she hadn't turned a page of in 40 minutes. She finally leaned over, voice low, the way people talk in churches and hospitals. "Son, are you all right?" I almost laughed. Son, that word. Victor had called me son once, the day I married his daughter. Slapped me on the back hard enough to bruise and said, "Welcome to the family, son." I'd taken it as warmth back then. Now I understood it had been a warning. "My wife," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "My wife's in the hospital." She didn't ask questions. She just reached into her purse, pulled out a small wooden cross on a leather string, and pressed it into my palm. Didn't say anything religious, didn't try to pray over me, just folded my fingers around it and went back to her book. I held that cross for the next 2 hours like it was the only thing keeping the plane in the sky. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tessa's face the day we found out she was pregnant. We'd been trying for almost 2 years. 2 years of negative tests. 2 years of her crying in the bathroom and pretending she wasn't. 2 years of doctors saying give it time. Give it time. And then one Sunday morning in July, she walked out of our bathroom holding a little white stick with 2 pink lines, and she didn't say anything at all. She just walked over to where I was standing in the kitchen, put her forehead against my chest, and started laughing. Laughing and crying at the same time, the way only happy people get to. We called her father that same afternoon. Victor's voice on speakerphone. The pause, the half-second of silence before he said, "Well, hope it's a boy." That was it. That was his reaction to his daughter's miracle. Hope it's a boy. Tessa had laughed it off. That's just Dad. She always said that. That's just Dad. Like it explained anything. I pulled my phone out again. No service. I checked Harper's last text, sent 20 minutes ago. Still in surgery. Mom's here. Dad's here too. Dad's here too. I read those 3 words probably 40 times before I put the phone face down on my tray table. He'd done it. He'd kicked his pregnant daughter on a kitchen floor, and then he'd driven to the hospital and walked into the waiting room like a concerned father. Sat down, probably accepted coffee from a nurse. Probably squeezed his wife's hand, probably told the doctor what a tragic accident it had been, and nobody, not one person in that family, was going to say a word. I knew that family. I'd spent 4 years watching it from the inside. 6 brothers, all grown men, all of them still flinching when their father raised his voice. Hunter was 38 and built like a linebacker, and I'd watched him drop a glass of sweet tea one Christmas because Victor walked into the room behind him. Blake was a surgeon. Colin owned 3 car dealerships. Dominic taught high school history. Grant was a deacon at the same church Victor had been an elder at for 25 years. Julian, the youngest, was 26 and had moved back home after his divorce, which Tessa had told me about in a whisper one night, like it was something shameful. 6 grown men, and not one of them had ever said the word no to their father in their lives. I thought about that for a long time over the Atlantic. Around hour 3, Daphne came back. She crouched down next to my seat in that way flight attendants do, one hand on the armrest, eye level so you don't feel talked down to. She had a small paper cup of coffee in her hand, and she set it on my tray. "The captain knows," she said quietly. "We've radioed ahead. There'll be someone meeting you at the gate to walk you through customs fast. You won't wait." I looked at her. I'm not a man who cries easy. I hadn't cried at my own father's funeral, but something about a stranger making my emergency her emergency cracked something loose in my chest, and I had to look at the ceiling for a second to keep it together. "Thank you," she nodded once. "What's her name?" "Tessa. I'll be thinking about Tessa." She walked away. I drank the coffee. It tasted like burnt cardboard, and it was the best coffee I've ever had in my life. I started writing things down on the back of the in-flight magazine. I don't know why. I think I needed to feel like I was doing something. I wrote down everything I could remember about Victor, the way he drank, bourbon, neat, 3 fingers every night by 7 o'clock, the way he kept a pistol in the kitchen drawer next to the silverware, the way he'd grabbed Tessa's wrist at our wedding rehearsal dinner hard enough that she'd worn a bracelet for a week to cover the mark, the way her mother, Eliza, sweet quiet Eliza, had never once in 4 years finished a sentence at her own dinner table without looking husband first to make sure she was allowed to. I wrote it all down. Names, dates, the little things I'd brushed off. I wrote down the time Victor had told me, 2 beers deep in his garage. "A man's got to keep his house in order, Mason. Soft husbands raise soft sons." I'd nodded back then, smiled, thought he was just being old country. I wasn't smiling now. The seatbelt sign came on for descent. The woman in 14B reached over without looking up from her book and patted my hand once. Daphne walked the aisle one last time, and when she passed my row, she gave me the smallest nod in the world. The plane tilted. The lights of Dallas-Fort Worth came up under us, orange and yellow and endless. That ugly, beautiful Texas sprawl I'd been homesick for 6 months straight. I should have been happy to see it. Instead, I felt something cold settle into my chest and stay there. Something quiet, something patient. The kind of feeling a man gets when he stops being scared and starts being something else. Something worse. I wasn't going to that hospital as a husband. I was going as a witness. The wheels touched down at 6:14 in the morning Central Time. I had my carry-on out of the overhead bin before the plane finished taxiing. A uniformed agent was waiting at the jet bridge with my name on a little card. He didn't ask questions. He just walked me through customs in under 4 minutes, past the long lines and the bleary-eyed travelers, out through a side door I didn't even know existed. My rental was prepaid. Black Ford parked in the short-term lot, keys in a lockbox. I tossed my bag in the passenger seat, put my hands on the steering wheel, and just sat there for 10 seconds, breathing. Then I called Harper. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was different now, flatter. The kind of voice people use when they've already cried out everything they had, and there's nothing left but the dry part underneath. "Mason, she's out of surgery." And? A long pause. "You need to get here. Dad's in the waiting room. He's Mason. He's telling everyone she fell. He brought flowers. White roses. He's smiling, Mason. He's smiling." I put the car in drive. "Harper, listen to me very carefully. Don't let him near her room. I don't care what you have to do. I don't care if you have to scream the building down. Keep him out of that room until I get there. Mason." 22 minutes. I hung up. I drove. The sun was coming up over I-35, the color of a bruise, that purple-yellow Texas dawn, and I drove with both hands locked on the wheel, and that little wooden cross from the woman in 14 be sitting on the dashboard in front of me. 22 minutes to Baylor. 22 minutes to the man holding white roses. And I still didn't know, not yet, that the worst thing waiting for me in that hospital wasn't going to be Victor's smile. It was going to be the look on Julian's face. The automatic doors at Baylor slid open with that soft hospital hiss, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the smell of disinfectant or the cold of the AC. It was the sound. That low hospital hum, distant beeping, a woman crying somewhere down a hallway I couldn't see. The fluorescent lights buzzing like they were trying to tell me something the human ear couldn't quite catch. I was still in my uniform, hadn't changed. Hadn't slept. There was dried coffee on the cuff of my sleeve, and the wooden cross from the plane was shoved deep in my front pocket, and I walked through that lobby with my boots squeaking on the tile like every step was announcing me. Harper saw me first. She was standing by the elevator bank in a gray sweatshirt 3 sizes too big. Tessa's sweatshirt, I realized. The one with the little hole in the cuff Tessa wouldn't throw away. Her hair was in a knot on top of her head. Her eyes were swollen the color of plums. The second she saw me, she didn't run, didn't wave, didn't do any of the things people do in movies. She just walked toward me with both hands pressed flat over her mouth, like she was trying to hold something inside her face. She got within arm's reach and stopped, looked up at me. "He's still here," she whispered. "Where?" "4th floor, waiting area outside the ICU. Her voice did that thing where it climbed too high and then died. "Mason. He's holding court. He's got Mom there. Pastor Whitfield from the church. 2 of my uncles. He's telling them she tripped on the stair runner. He's crying." "Mason." He squeezed out real tears. The elevator dinged. We stepped in. Harper hit 4. The doors slid shut, and it was just the 2 of us in our reflections in the brushed steel. And for the first time in 4 hours, I let myself look at her. Really look. And I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not grief. Recognition, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. And now that it was here, some part of her was almost relieved. "Harper," my voice came out lower than I meant. "How long has he been doing this?" She didn't answer right away. The elevator climbed. 2, 3. "Since before I can remember," she said quietly. "Tessa got the worst of it. She was the only girl after 6 boys. Dad said she was. He said she was supposed to be another son. He never forgave her for not being one." The doors opened on 4. I heard him before I saw him. That voice. Booming down the hallway the way only Victor's voice could boom. That good old boy Texas baritone that filled every room it entered whether you wanted it to or not. He was telling a story. Something about Tessa being clumsy as a child. Something about how she'd always been delicate. I heard somebody laugh politely. A woman's laugh. Tessa's mother probably. Doing what she'd done for 40 years. Laughing on cue. I turned the corner into the waiting area and the whole room stopped. There were maybe 12 people in that little carpeted square of plastic chairs and bad coffee. Victor was in the middle of them, sitting in the center seat like a king holding court, white roses across his lap, his big rancher hands folded on top of the wrapping. He had on a clean blue button-down. His hair was combed. There was not a single mark on him. Not a scratch. Not a speck of blood. He'd showered before he came. He'd showered. His wife, Tessa's mother, Eliza, was on his left, small and folded into herself the way a piece of paper folds when you don't know what to do with it. Her hands were shaking in her lap. She didn't look up when I walked in. On Victor's right, in a tight curved row along the wall, stood his 6 sons. Hunter, Blake, Colin, Dominic, Grant, Julian. All 6 of them lined up like pallbearers at a funeral that hadn't happened yet. Not one of them was sitting. Not one of them was talking. They were just standing there along that wall in their flannel shirts, and their work jackets, and their Sunday clothes. Hands clasped in front of them, eyes pointed at the carpet. 6 grown men who looked like little boys waiting to be told what to do. And Julian, the youngest, 26 years old, the one Tessa used to braid hair for when he was a kid. Julian was crying, silently, tears just rolling down his face. He saw me first, and the second his eyes met mine, his whole jaw started shaking, and he looked away so fast it was like I'd burned him. That was when I knew. Every single one of them knew. Victor stood up, white roses in one hand, the other hand open wide like he was about to pull me into a hug. "Son." His voice cracked just right. He'd practiced it. "Son, thank God you're here. Oh, thank God." The room was watching. Pastor Whitfield, the uncles, a nurse pretending to chart something at the desk. I felt their eyes on me like heat lamps, and I knew. I knew what Victor was doing. He was building a wall of witnesses. He was going to hug me in front of 12 people and call me son, and from that moment on, any version of events that didn't include him a grieving father would sound like a lie. He took a step toward me. She fell down the stairs, Mason. The runner came loose. I told her 100 times to fix that runner. I told her stop. The word came out so quiet, I almost didn't hear it myself. Victor blinked. The smile stayed on his face, but it tightened at the corners, the way a piece of plastic tightens before it cracks. Mason, son, I know you're tired. I said stop. Pastor Whitfield half stood. Now, Mason, let's all just take a breath. I didn't look at the pastor. I didn't look at the uncles. I looked at Eliza, Tessa's mother, the small folded woman in the chair, who hadn't lifted her head once since I'd walked in. I crouched down, slow, the way you'd approach a deer in a field. I put my hand on top of hers, very gently, and I felt her flinch the same exact way Tessa flinched the first time I raised my hand too fast. Eliza, my voice was as soft as I could make it. Look at me, please. She didn't. Her chin started trembling. A tear hit the back of my hand. Eliza, did she fall down the stairs? The room went so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights again, that faint electric whine. I could hear the second hand on the wall clock above the nurse's station. Tick, tick, tick. Eliza's lips moved. Nothing came out the first time. She tried again. Mason, she whispered. Please, please don't. That was all I needed. I stood up. I turned toward Victor. He was still smiling, still holding those white roses, but something behind his eyes had changed. That flat reptile stillness that comes into a certain kind of man's face when he realizes the room isn't his anymore. Where is she? I said. Mason, son, the doctor said. Where is my wife? A nurse stepped forward. Young woman, maybe 25. Name tag said Paige. She'd been watching the whole thing from the desk. She'd seen Eliza flinch. She'd seen the 6 sons against the wall. She had that look certain nurses get. The look of somebody who has worked in ER long enough to know exactly what they're looking at. Sir, she said, I'll take you to her, just family. She turned to Victor before he could open his mouth. Immediate family, husband only, per the patient's request on intake. Victor's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It twitched, just once, right under the left eye. Per the patient's request. Tessa had been conscious long enough on intake to tell them, long enough to give them one instruction before they put her under. Keep my father out. I followed Paige down the hallway. I didn't look back at Victor. I didn't have to. I could feel him watching me go, and I could feel the 6 sons watching too. And somewhere in the middle of that long fluorescent walk past the nurse's station and the supply carts and the empty gurneys parked against the wall, Paige slowed down just slightly and said, without turning her head, Mr. Mason, when you're ready, there's some things on her chart you need to see. I didn't answer. I just kept walking toward room 4-2, where my wife was lying behind a closed door with a bruise shaped like a boot print across her stomach, and where my entire life, the one I thought I had, the one I thought I understood, was about to end in the time it took to push that door open. Room 412 smelled like antiseptic and something sweeter underneath it. The kind of sweet that doesn't belong in hospitals, the kind that makes you think of flowers left too long in standing water. There was a single window on the far wall, gray morning light coming through the blinds in thin strips. A monitor beeping in the corner, steady, patient, indifferent to everything that had happened to put it there. Tessa was in the bed. I'll tell you something about seeing the person you love like that. People always say it in movies. I barely recognized her. And you always think that's dramatic. You always think you'd know your person anywhere, under any circumstances, in any condition. You think love makes you immune to shock. It doesn't. I stood in the doorway of room 412 for 3 full seconds before my brain caught up to what my eyes were sending it. The left side of her face was swollen so thick the eye had disappeared into it. Just a dark puffy seam where her eye used to be. Her lip was split and stitched. There were 4 lines in both arms. Her hair, that dark hair she spent 20 minutes on every morning, that she complained about in summer and loved in winter, was plastered against the pillow in damp tangles. Her hands were folded on top of the blanket. Small hands, the knuckles were scraped raw. She'd fought back. I crossed the room in 4 steps, pulled the chair up to her bed, sat down, and took both her hands in mine as carefully as I've ever held anything in my life. The monitor kept beeping. Outside in the hallway, someone was rolling a cart. A door opened and closed somewhere. The whole ordinary world kept moving, completely unbothered. I put my forehead down on top of our joined hands and stayed there. I don't know how long. Long enough that when I lifted my head, the strip of light through the blinds had shifted slightly. Long enough that my back had stiffened from the plastic chair. I looked at her face, what I could see of it under the swelling and the bruising, and I made her a promise out loud in that empty room, in a voice barely above a whisper. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. And he is never going to touch you again. A machine beeped. The blanket rose and fell. I believed, in that moment, that the promise was simple, that it would be simple, that all I had to do was stand between my wife and the man who'd hurt her, and it would be done. I didn't know yet about the recordings. I didn't know yet about Eliza Bryant, or the storage unit, or the envelope with my name on it in Tessa's handwriting. I didn't know yet about the shoebox. All I knew was the boot print bruise across my wife's stomach, and the promise I'd just made to a woman who couldn't hear me yet. Nurse Page came in 30 minutes later. She was carrying a tablet and a printed chart, and she had the careful, composed face of someone who was going to say something hard, and had already decided not to soften it. The surgery went well, she said. Baby's heartbeat is stable. They were able to stop the internal bleeding. Dr. Reyes will be in at 8 o'clock to go over everything in detail. She paused, looked at the chart, then back at me. Mr. Mason, the injuries your wife sustained, the pattern of them, they're not consistent with a fall. I looked at her. The bruising on her lower abdomen is repetitive impact, multiple strikes. The fracture on her left forearm is a defensive injury. She was covering herself. Page's voice didn't waver. She'd done this before. There's also older bruising in various stages of healing. The ER attending flagged it, and we've already notified the hospital's patient advocate. A report has been filed with Fort Worth PD. Thank you, I said. It was all I could manage. She nodded once and left me with the chart. I sat with it on my lap and read every line 3 times. Defensive fracture, repetitive impact, older bruising in various stages of healing. The words sat in my stomach like stones. Older bruising, plural, stages of healing. This wasn't the first time. I was still sitting there, holding that chart, when my phone buzzed. Harper, he's asking to see her. Tell the nurses he's her father and he has rights. They're pushing back, but Mason, he's making a scene. I put the chart down. I stood up. I kissed Tessa's hand, the one with the scraped knuckles, and I walked back out into the hallway. I didn't take the elevator, I took the stairs. 4 flights down, and I wasn't even breathing hard by the time I pushed through the stairwell door into the ground floor parking garage. It took me about 30 seconds of scanning the concrete shadows before I spotted him. Victor, standing by his truck, a black F-250 he kept cleaner than a surgeon's table. One hand on the door, the other pressing his phone to his ear. He was talking, laughing, actually laughing, right there in the parking garage of the hospital where his daughter was in the ICU. I walked toward him across that concrete floor, and the sound of my boots echoed up into the rafters. He saw me at about 20 feet. The laugh stopped. He lowered the phone and turned to face me with his shoulders squared, the way a man stands when he's deciding whether to perform innocence or switch to something else. He went with something else. He straightened his back, lifted his chin, let the charm fall off his face, like he was taking off a jacket he was done pretending to need. We stood 8 feet apart in the concrete quiet of that garage and just looked at each other. I didn't figure you for the type to leave his pregnant wife alone for 6 months, he said. Must have been important work. I let that sit there. How many times, Victor? He tilted his head. How many times what, son? Don't call me that. My voice was still quiet, still even. Something cold had moved into the center of my chest, and it was keeping everything in place. How many times did you put your hands on her? Victor smiled. Not the performance smile from upstairs, the real one, the one underneath, small and flat and ugly. That's a marriage, he said. A family. You don't get to come in here after 6 months overseas and decide you understand what a family looks like, boy. Tessa is my daughter. She was my daughter before she was your wife, and she'll be my... Victor. He stopped. How many times? The smile thinned out. He opened his mouth, and then behind me I heard footsteps, multiple sets, quick, coming from the stairwell door I'd just come through, and I didn't even have time to turn around before they were there, all 6 of them. Hunter, Blake, Colin, Dominic, Grant, Julian. They came across that garage floor in a spread, not running, walking fast, and they positioned themselves between their father and me with their hands raised and their faces tight, with something that wasn't anger. It was terror. Raw, old, deeply installed terror. The kind you can't think your way out of because it was put in too early, before thinking was even possible. Mason, Hunter, the oldest. Big hands up, palms out. Mason, please, you need to walk away right now. I'm not going anywhere. Mason, get out of my way. Hunter, the youngest. His voice was completely broken, not even trying to be steady. He stepped forward slightly from the group, chin down, tears already coming, and he looked at me the way a man looks at someone he's asking to save him, even though he's the one standing in the wrong spot. Please, Mason. You don't understand what hell, Julian. Victor's voice came from behind them. Quiet, very quiet, the way water gets quiet right before a drain swallows it. Step back in line. Julian flinched like he'd been struck. Step back. My eyes went across all 6 of them, really went across them. And I saw it for the first time properly. Not grown men protecting a difficult father. 6 people trying to survive the same man they'd been surviving their whole lives. 6 people who'd learned so long ago to fold themselves small that they didn't even know anymore they were doing it. Hunter's jaw was locked. Blake's hands were shaking. Colin was staring at the floor. Dominic was gripping his own forearm. Grant had his eyes closed like he was praying. And Julian was just standing there falling apart in real time, quietly, like a building that's been compromised at the foundation and is finally going. I looked back at Victor. He was watching his sons with that small flat smile. Enjoying it, I realized. He was genuinely enjoying watching them perform for him. Something in my stomach turned to ice. Hunter put a hand on my chest, gently. Mason, please. You don't know what he does when someone pushes him. His voice dropped to almost nothing. Our mom. Mason, our mom. He stopped, swallowed, tried again. His eyes were red at the edges. She didn't fall down any stairs either. The garage went completely silent. I heard Victor's keys jingle as he shifted his weight. The fluorescent tube above us burst. Somewhere in the levels above, tires squeaked on concrete as a car made a turn. Tessa's mother hadn't died of cancer. The information didn't arrive like a shock. It arrived like a key turning in a lock that had always been there, on a door I'd walked past 100 times, in a hallway I'd always felt uneasy in without knowing why. All the little things assembling themselves into a shape I should have seen years ago. The way nobody in that family ever mentioned her, the way Victor always changed the subject, the way Tessa had cried once, very late, very quietly, and when I'd asked what was wrong she'd said nothing, just missing her. Not missing her the way you miss someone who's gone. Missing her the way you miss someone you're not allowed to look for. I looked at Hunter, at the red edges of his eyes, at the way his hand was still flat on my chest because he knew. He knew what I was about to do. How long have you known? I said. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The answer was in every line of his face, in every year of silence, in the way all 6 of them were standing in a parking garage at 7 o'clock in the morning begging a man they barely knew not to ask the one question they'd spent their whole lives not asking out loud. Mason, Hunter's voice was barely a sound. There's a right way to do this. Please, he'll run. If you go at him now, he'll run and he'll take everything with him, and it'll be your word against his, and we both know whose word wins in this county. He pressed his hand slightly harder against my chest, not pushing, steadying. There's a right way, please let it be the right way. I stood there, 8 feet from Victor, who was still smiling. I thought about Tessa's knuckles scraped raw. I thought about the defensive fracture on her forearm. I thought about the old bruising in various stages of healing. I thought about a woman who didn't fall down any stairs. I took one step back, then another. Hunter exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for 30 years. I turned and I walked back toward the stairwell without a word. And as I pushed through that door, I heard Victor's voice echo across the concrete one final time. Smooth, satisfied, talking to his sons like I wasn't even worth watching leave. Good boys, he said. I stopped with my hand on the door, didn't turn around. Then I kept walking, because Hunter was right. There was a right way. And as I climbed those 4 flights back up to room 412, back to Tessa's scraped hands and the monitor beeping in the corner, I made myself a second promise. Quieter than the first one, colder and a great deal more dangerous. I was going to find it. Tessa woke up at 11:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock on the wall above her bed, the way a man watches a countdown. Not because I wanted the time to pass, but because I needed something to focus on that wasn't her face. Wasn't the bruising. Wasn't the 4 lines. The clock gave me something neutral to look at while everything inside me was anything but. Her fingers moved first, just a small curl, like she was reaching for something in a dream. Then her breathing changed, deepened, shifted, and the monitor picked it up immediately. The beeping spacing out slightly, and I leaned forward in my chair and put my hand over hers. "Hey," I said, barely above a whisper. "Hey, I'm here." Her one unswollen eye opened slowly. It took a moment to focus. It moved across the ceiling, then the window, then the IV pole, and then it found me. And when it did, something happened in her face that I don't have a clean word for. Not relief exactly, not surprise, something older than both of those things. Something that looked like a person finally putting down something they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it had weight. Her lip was stitched, and I could see it hurt her to move her mouth. She tried anyway. "You came," she whispered. "Tessa, I didn't know if you'd—" Her voice broke on the edge of the word. "I didn't know if went through." "It went through." I pressed her hand between both of mine. "I landed at 6 o'clock. I've been here since 6:30. I paused. "You've been out for almost 5 hours. She closed her eye. A tear ran sideways down her temple into her hair. "The baby," she said, "stable, heartbeat strong. Dr. Reyes is coming at 8 o'clock tonight to go over everything." I kept my voice as level as I could. "She made it, Tessa. Ivy made it." The sound Tessa made then was not a word. It was something under words. Something that came from a place that doesn't have language. She turned her face into the pillow, and her shoulders shook, and I sat there with my hand on her hair and let her have it. All of it. Every second of it. Because she had earned that cry 100 times over. When she came back, her eye was red, and her breathing was steadier. "He's here, isn't he?" she said, not a question. "4th floor waiting room. Harper's keeping him out." She nodded slowly. Something moved across her face. Not fear, something more like resignation. Like a woman who had done her math a long time ago and had already accepted what the numbers added up to. "Mason," she turned her head to look at me fully. "My phone, where's my phone?" I looked around. There was a small plastic bag on the bedside table. Her personal effects from the ER. Phone, keys, 1 earring. I handed her the phone. She didn't unlock it right away. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long moment. The way you look at something you've been protecting for a very long time and are finally about to hand over. "Under the pillow," she said quietly. "I put it under the pillow every night, just in case." She looked up at me, opened the voice memos, the folder called grocery lists. I took the phone, opened the app, found the folder. There were 61 recordings. 61. The oldest one was dated 22 months ago. I looked at her. "Start with the one from March," she said. "March 14th, I found it, pressed play, held it between us so we could both hear." Victor's voice filled the small hospital room. Clear as a phone call, close mic, no static. He was talking about the baby, about how a daughter was a disappointment, about how Tessa had always been a disappointment. Too soft, too slow, too much like her mother. Then his voice dropped into something lower and uglier, and he said, word for word, with the flat certainty of a man who has never once been told no, "That baby better be a boy, or I'll finish what I started." I stopped the recording. My hands were completely steady. That scared me more than if they'd been shaking. "How long?" I said. "Since I was 3 months along." She watched my face carefully. I knew he was escalating. I knew something was going to happen. I needed it to be documented. I needed something that was mine. Something nobody could take away or call a misunderstanding. 61 recordings, Tessa. I know. In 22 months. I know, Mason. Her voice was quiet and even and utterly exhausted. I know how it sounds. I know you want to ask me why I didn't tell you. Why I didn't leave. Why I... She stopped. Breathed. Because he told me if I left, he'd make sure I lost the baby. He had a lawyer. He had a judge. He had the whole county. Mason, he's been here 40 years. I've been here my whole life. You know what that means in a place like this? I didn't know. I'd just spent 4 hours on a plane writing it all down on the back of an in-flight magazine. So I built a case instead, she said simply. I sat with that for a moment. My wife, 26 weeks pregnant, living in the same county as the man who was threatening her unborn child, not running, not collapsing, building a case. I put the phone down on the blanket between us. There's more, she said. There's a storage unit on Jacksboro Highway. Code is 0416, our anniversary. A small pause. There's a box in there. Medical records, photographs. Some of it is about me. Some of it is about his first wife. The room went very still. Eliza, I said slowly. Tessa's, I meant mine. Not Eliza, she said. Before Eliza, his first wife, her name was Ruth. She died in 2003. They ruled it an accident. Everything Hunter had said in the parking garage rearranged itself in my chest. Our mom didn't fall down any stairs either. I'd assumed he meant Eliza. I'd assumed wrong. There had been a woman before Eliza. A woman named Ruth, and she was dead. The door opened. Dr. Ophelia Reyes walked in. Mid-50s, natural gray hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The kind of calm that comes from 20 years of delivering news both ways. She looked at me, then at Tessa, then at the phone on the blanket. And she pulled a chair up to the other side of the bed with the quiet efficiency of a woman who understood exactly what kind of room she'd walked into. Mrs. Tessa, she said gently, how are you feeling? Tell him, Tessa said. Whatever you were going to tell me, tell him too. Dr. Reyes looked at me, folded her hands on her knee. The baby is stable, and we expect her to stay that way, she began. Your wife is going to need 4 to 6 weeks of restricted movement, and we'll be monitoring closely. She paused. But there's something else, something we found during the imaging that isn't about the baby. She reached into the folder she was carrying and laid a single printed page on the blanket. Your wife has been in contact with an attorney, she said. She listed her on intake as her emergency contact second after you. She tapped the page. The attorney's name is Eliza Bryant. She's already been notified that your wife is here. She called the hospital an hour ago. Dr. Reyes looked at me steadily. She said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly, don't let him leave the county. Tessa reached over and took my hand again. I told you, she said softly. I build a case. Eliza Bryant arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. I'd been expecting a lawyer. I got something closer to a force of nature in a gray blazer. She was maybe 45, natural locks pulled back tight, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen the inside of more courtrooms than most judges. She walked down that hospital hallway like the floor owed her something, nodded at the nurse's station without breaking stride, and pushed room 42's door open with the flat of her palm. She looked at Tessa first, a long look, the kind between two people who've had conversations the rest of the world wasn't invited to. You held up, Eliza said. Barely, Tessa said. Then Eliza looked at me, measured, direct. The kind of eye contact that isn't aggressive, but isn't soft either. It's just honest, the way a surgeon's hands are honest when they're deciding where to cut. Mason. She set her briefcase on the small table by the window and clicked it open. I've been working with your wife for 14 months. Everything she's about to show you, I already have copies of, authenticated, dated, and stored in 3 separate locations. She pulled out a thick manila folder and set it flat on the table. Victor Aldrich has been hurting women in this county for over 30 years. Your wife is the first one who decided to do something about it before he finished. I looked at Tessa. She was already looking at me. That same steady look she'd had when she told me about the storage unit, about Ruth, about 61 voice memos filed under grocery lists. The look of a woman who had been carrying a plan for so long she'd made peace with every version of how it might end. How much did you know? I asked her. Before you started recording? Before the storage unit? How much did you already know? She was quiet for a moment. I knew about Ruth, she said. His first wife. I found her death certificate in his files when I was 17. He'd kept it. I don't know why men like him keep things like that. Trophies, maybe. I put it back exactly where I found it, and I never said a word to anyone. She paused. But I didn't forget. You were 17. I was 17. I sat with that. A 17-year-old girl finding a dead woman's paperwork in her father's files and putting it back and carrying it in silence for 14 years. Not because she was weak, because she was already, at 17, calculating what it would take to survive him long enough to stop him. Eliza spread several documents across the table, photographs, medical records, printed bank statements, a death certificate. Ruth Aldridge, November 2003. Blunt force trauma to the skull, ruled accidental fall. A handwritten statement from a neighbor, signed and notarized, dated 8 months ago. 2 more signed statements from women in the county I didn't recognize, describing incidents going back to the early 90s. He's done this before, I said. 3 confirmed victims before Tessa, Eliza said. Ruth, who didn't survive. A woman named Giselle Harmon, who moved to Oklahoma in 2009 with 2 broken ribs and a restraining order she never filed. And Eliza, your mother-in-law. She said it evenly, no drama. Tessa's mother has been in contact with me for 6 months. She's agreed to testify. The room was very quiet. Eliza wants to testify, I said slowly. Against her own husband. She's been waiting for someone to build something strong enough that he couldn't dismantle it, Eliza said. On her own she had nothing that would stick. With what Tessa's built, the recordings, the photographs, the medical records, Ruth's case, she has a wall to stand behind. I looked at Tessa again. You organized this, I said. You organized your own mother. She came to me, Tessa said quietly. 2 years ago, right before I got pregnant. She showed up at our house when you were overseas. Sat at our kitchen table and drank tea and told me about Ruth. Told me things about their marriage. I dochium. She stopped. Things I won't repeat right now. And she said, I don't know how to stop him, Tessa, but you're smarter than me. You always were. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. So, I got smarter. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the Dallas skyline sitting flat and gray under an October afternoon sky. Down below, the hospital parking lot. Rows of ordinary cars belonging to ordinary people having ordinary terrible days. Somewhere down there, Victor's black F-250 was probably still parked. Cleaner than a surgeon's table. Eliza gave me a moment, then she spoke to my back. There's something else, she said. Something we didn't tell you yet because we needed to know you were actually here. That you weren't going to do something that would compromise the case. I turned around, she reached into the briefcase and pulled out a single white envelope. My name on the front in Tessa's handwriting. Not the shaky handwriting of a sick woman, but the clean, deliberate script of someone writing something they'd thought about for a long time. She wrote that 11 months ago, Eliza said. Instructions were to give it to you only if Victor put her in a hospital. I took the envelope, looked at it, looked at Tessa. Open it, she said. Inside were 3 things. A folded handwritten letter, a small brass key, and a photograph. Old, Polaroid style, slightly faded at the edges of Victor standing next to a man in a suit outside what looked like a courthouse. The man in the suit was smiling at Victor the way men smile at old friends. The kind of smile that means I owe you or you owe me. Underneath the photograph in Tessa's handwriting 2 words. Judge Hale. I looked up at Eliza. Preston Hale, she said. Tarrant County District Judge. Victor's hunting partner for 20 years. They go back to the same church, the same lodge, the same good old boy network that runs this part of Texas like it's still 1987. She leaned forward slightly. If this case gets assigned to Hale, and in this county there's a real chance it does, it gets buried. Victor walks, and everyone who testified against him becomes a target. So, what does the key open? I said. The storage unit, Tessa said. Jacksboro Highway, but not the box you know about. She held my eyes. The second box. The one I didn't tell you about in case things went wrong and he got to you before Eliza did. What's in the second box? I said. Tessa looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at me. Judge Hale's daughter-in-law, Eliza said carefully, is a woman named Paige Hale. Married into the family in 2018. She came to me 14 months ago. Same week Tessa did. Different day. With a story about a hunting weekend in 2017 where Victor Aldridge was a guest at the Hale property. A pause. She wasn't a guest. The implications of that sentence settled into the room like cold air under a door. Paige Hale gave me a signed statement. Eliza continued. Photographs. A medical record from a clinic 2 counties over where she went the following Monday. She straightened slightly. Judge Hale has never been told what happened to his daughter-in-law at that hunting weekend. He thinks Victor is his friend. The moment he finds out, he recuses himself. I said. Immediately, Eliza said. And probably never speaks to Victor Aldridge again. I stood in the middle of that hospital room with the envelope in my hand, and the brass key, and the photograph of 2 men smiling outside a courthouse. And I understood for the first time the true shape of what my wife had built. Not a complaint, not a cry for help, a trap, patient, precise, and baited with the one thing a powerful man can never protect himself from: the truth about what he does when he thinks nobody important is watching. He doesn't know any of this exists, I said. He thinks she's a scared pregnant woman in an ICU, Eliza said. He's been sitting on the 4th floor all day performing grief and expecting this to go the way it always goes. She closed her briefcase with a clean snap. It's not going to go the way it always goes. I looked at Tessa, she looked back at me. Bruised eye, split lip, for lines in both arms, and underneath all of that, underneath everything Victor had done to put her in that bed, something in her face that was so steady and so clear it almost took my breath away. Not anger, not fear, certainty. Mason, she said quietly, I need you to do something very hard. Anything. I need you to go back upstairs, she said, to the waiting room, and I need you to sit down next to my father, and I need you to be kind to him. Her eye held mine. Not for him, for the case. Eliza needs 2 more weeks to get the filing ready. 2 weeks where he thinks he's won. 2 weeks where he's not running. She paused. Can you do that? I thought about the boot print bruise across her stomach, the defensive fracture on her forearm, a woman named Ruth who didn't survive, Paige Hale and a hunting weekend, and a clinic 2 counties over, 61 voice memos under grocery lists. I thought about Victor's face in the parking garage, that small flat smile. 2 weeks. I said, 2 weeks. Tessa said. I folded the envelope, put it in my front pocket next to the wooden cross from the woman on the plane, picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. Mason, Tessa's voice stopped me at the door. I turned. She was looking at me with that same steady certainty, and underneath it, just barely visible, the way light shows under a closed door, something that looked a lot like love, raw and tired, and absolutely undefeated. Thank you for coming home. I stood there for a second. For hours, I said. I'd have done it in 2. 2 weeks is a very long time to smile at a man you want to destroy. The first 3 days were the hardest. Victor had settled into a routine. He came to the hospital every morning at 9 o'clock, stayed 2 hours, sat in the 4th floor waiting area with coffee and a newspaper, and whoever from the church had come to keep him company that day. He never pushed to see Tessa again after Paige the nurse had turned him away. He didn't need to. He was performing grief in the waiting room and letting it do the work for him. I sat with him every morning, poured his coffee, nodded at his stories, laughed in the right places, called him sir, because I knew he needed to hear it, and because Eliza had told me in that flat, surgical way she had of saying difficult things, that every day Victor spent feeling unthreatened was another day he didn't move his money, or call his lawyer, or disappear into one of the 3 hunting properties he owned across 2 states. Keep him comfortable, she'd said. Comfortable men get lazy. Lazy men make mistakes. So, I kept him comfortable. Blake came by the hospital on day 3. He found me alone in the hallway outside Tessa's room, and stood there with his hands in his pockets, and his eyes on the floor, the way all the brothers did when they were trying to say something they didn't know how to say. She's awake, I said. I know, Harper told me. He was quiet for a moment. Is she going to? She's going to be fine. He nodded, kept looking at the floor. Mason, I want you to know that he stopped, started again. I tried. A few years ago, I called a hotline for advice. They told me without the victim's cooperation, there wasn't much that he shook his head. I should have pushed harder. Blake. He looked up. I know, I said simply. Not as absolution, just as acknowledgement. He'd been a child raised inside something he didn't build and couldn't dismantle alone, and carrying that was its own kind of damage. I know you did what you could. He nodded once, looked back at the floor. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out to me. I wrote it all down, he said. Everything I can remember. Dates, what I saw, what he said. He pressed the paper into my hand. I don't know if it helps, but it's something. I folded it into my pocket next to the envelope and the wooden cross, and said nothing else. We stood there in the hallway for another moment, and then Blake walked away toward the elevator, and I watched him go, and I thought, not for the first time, that this family was full of people who'd been quietly collecting evidence their whole lives without knowing that's what they were doing. Storing the damage, documenting the wreckage, waiting for someone to show up with a place to put it all. Tessa came home on day 6. Dr. Reyes discharged her with a strict list of restrictions. No stairs, no lifting, weekly monitoring appointments, complete rest. We stayed at Harper's house, which was a 20-minute drive from the hospital and 40 minutes from Victor's property. And it had a guest room on the ground floor with a lock on the door that Harper had installed herself 3 years ago for reasons she didn't explain and I didn't ask about. The first night, Tessa slept for 11 hours straight. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the street outside and didn't sleep at all. On day 8, Eliza called. "I need you both at my office tomorrow morning," she said. 9 o'clock. "I've got the filing 90% ready, but I need Tessa's final sign-off on the sworn statement, and I need you to hear the full strategy before we pull the trigger." "Is it ready?" I asked. "Enough to hold. It was ready 6 months ago." She said, "I've just been waiting for him to give us the physical evidence to go with it." A pause. "He gave us a lot, Mason." Eliza's office was on the 7th floor of a glass building in downtown Fort Worth. Clean, minimal, the kind of office that says I don't need to impress you because my record does that. She had 2 associates with her when we arrived, a young man named Quentin who handled the filing logistics, and an older woman named Morgan who'd been a prosecutor for 16 years before going private and who looked at Victor's file the way a demolition expert looks at a building they've been hired to bring down. Eliza laid the full case out on the conference table, printed and organized into sections, tabbed, indexed. It filled the table from one end to the other. "Criminal charges," she began, moving along the table like she was walking a jury through an exhibit. "Aggravated assault with serious bodily injury. The incident that put Tessa in the hospital. That alone carries 5 to 99 years in Texas." She moved to the next section, older injuries, the medical records showing repeated trauma over a 22-month period. Pattern of abuse. That's a separate charge under continuous family violence. Mandatory minimum 2 years, maximum 10, stacked on top of the first charge. She moved again. Ruth Aldrich. She set a hand flat on that section. "This is the one that changes everything. Ruth died November 14, 2003. Blunt force trauma, ruled accidental fall. We have 3 things the original investigation didn't. A witness statement from a neighbor who heard the altercation that night and was too scared to come forward at the time. A medical record from 6 months before Ruth's death showing injuries consistent with repeated physical abuse. And," she paused, "a recording." The room went very still. "Tessa," Eliza said. Tessa reached into her bag and set a small digital recorder on the table. "Old. The kind with actual buttons. Dad kept it," she said quietly, "in his files. I found it when I was 17. Same time I found Ruth's death certificate. I didn't know what was on it then. I came back for it 2 years ago." She looked at the recorder. "It's him and Ruth, the night she died. He didn't know she was recording." Eliza pressed play. We listened to 4 minutes and 11 seconds of audio that I will never fully describe. What I will say is that by the time it ended, Morgan, 16 years as a prosecutor, had seen everything, had taken her glasses off and was pressing 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose with her eyes closed. Quentin had stopped typing. The room was silent for a long moment. "Murder," I said. "Felony murder." Eliza said, "No statute of limitations in Texas." She clicked the recorder off and set it back in its evidence bag. "Victor Aldridge is not just a violent man, Mason. He is a man who has killed before and who has been protected by geography, money, loyalty, and fear for over 20 years. She looked at me steadily. "That ends when we file, which brings me to the most important part of this conversation." She sat down for the first time since we'd arrived. "The filing is ready. The moment we submit it, Victor will be notified. He has a lawyer, and his lawyer will call him within the hour. He will either surrender or he will run. We cannot control which one he chooses." She folded her hands on the table. "What we can control is the judge." She looked at Tessa. Tessa nodded. "I've drafted a separate filing," Eliza said. "A recusal motion for Judge Preston Hale to be submitted simultaneously with the criminal complaint. The moment both land, Hale is off the case before Victor's lawyer even has time to make a call." She paused. "The replacement judge, if the recusal goes through as I expected it to, will be Judge Amelia Whitcomb, family violence specialist, zero-tolerance record. She's tried 41 domestic violence cases in 11 years. A brief pause. Victor won't find a single ally on her bench. I looked at Tessa across the conference table. She was sitting straight-backed, hands folded, watching Eliza with an expression of complete calm. 26 weeks pregnant, 6 days out of the hospital, bruise still fading down the left side of her face, sitting in a lawyer's office dismantling the most powerful man she'd ever known piece by documented piece. "When do we file?" I said. Eliza looked at her calendar. "Sunday," she said. "Victor hosts a family dinner every Sunday, every week, same time, same house, surrounded by witnesses." She looked up. "I want him in that room when the call comes. I want every person he's ever performed innocence for to be sitting at that table." I thought about Sunday dinners at Victor's house. The long oak table, the good china, Pastor Whitfield saying grace, 6 sons sitting in birth order, Victor at the head carving something, filling the room with that voice. "He'll never see it coming," I said. "No," Eliza said. "He won't." She closed the folder. "Go home," she said quietly. "Rest. Be with your wife. Sunday is 6 days away." She looked at both of us, long, steady, certain. "Let me carry it from here." We drove back to Harper's house in near silence. The October afternoon was pale gold outside the windows, that flat Texas light that makes everything look slightly unreal. Tessa had her hand on the window glass, watching the city pass. "Halfway home," she said very quietly, not to me exactly, just out loud into the space of the car. "He used to tell me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much." A pause. "He spent 30 years trying to make me small enough to control." She turned and looked at me. "He made me the most dangerous thing in the room instead." I kept my eyes on the road, but I was smiling. Julian knocked on Harper's door at 11:47 at night. I knew it was him before I even opened it. Something about the knock, hesitant 3 taps, then a pause, then one more, like a man who had changed his mind twice on the way up the porch steps and forced himself to finish anyway. He was standing in the yellow porch light in a flannel shirt, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, eyes red at the rims. He was holding a shoebox against his chest with both arms, the way you'd hold something you were afraid to drop. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. "Julian," I stepped back from the door. "Come in." He sat at Harper's kitchen table and set the shoebox down in front of him and stared at it for a long moment before he spoke. "I've been carrying this around in my truck for 2 weeks, he said. Since before what happened to Tessa." He pressed both palms flat on the lid. "I kept telling myself it wasn't the right time. There's never a right time with him. That's how he keeps you. You're always waiting for the right time, and the right time never comes, and another year goes by." I sat across from him and waited. He lifted the lid. Inside, photographs, documents, handwritten notes on folded paper, a small prescription bottle with a woman's name on the label, hospital wristbands, the paper kind, cut off and saved, and at the bottom, a single envelope unsealed with one word on the front, in careful cursive handwriting. "Someday, our mother wrote that," Julian said. "Ruth. She put this box together herself. She hid it in the ceiling of the laundry room behind a panel she'd loosened herself." His voice was very even, the way voices get when a person has rehearsed something so many times the emotion has worn smooth. "Hunter found it after she died. He was 15. He didn't know what to do with it, so he kept it. When he got older, he added to it. Then Blake, then Colin." He looked up at me. "We've all been adding to it for 20 years, Mason. Every time something happened that we knew was wrong and couldn't stop." I looked at the box. 20 years of quiet documentation. 20 years of sons watching their father and collecting the evidence of him the only way powerless people can. Carefully, secretly, one small piece at a time. "Does Eliza know about this?" I said. "She will tonight." Hunter's voice came from the hallway. I looked up. Hunter was standing in the kitchen doorway, behind him Blake, then Colin, Dominic, Grant, all of them filing quietly into Harper's small kitchen in the middle of the night, finding spaces to stand along the walls and counters, filling the room with the particular silence of people who have finally decided something they can't decide. "We called each other after you walked away in the garage," Hunter said. "Took us about a week to stop being scared long enough to think straight." He looked at the shoebox on the table. "But then Tessa came home, and I saw her face, and I thought." He stopped, swallowed. "I thought about Mom, about what she would have wanted, about what she actually tried to do." He looked at me directly. "She tried to stop him too. She just didn't have anyone to hand it to." The kitchen was completely quiet. 6 brothers standing in a small room in the middle of the night choosing, for the first time in their lives, the side that wasn't fear. I picked up my phone and called Eliza. She answered on the second ring. I told her what was on the table. There was a brief silence on her end. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said. I looked around the room, at Julian's red eyes, at Hunter's locked jaw, at Blake's shaking hands, finally, holding something that wasn't silence. "Tell them to stay," Eliza said. "Every one of them." Sunday came the way inevitable things always come. Quietly, ordinarily, like any other morning that doesn't know what it's carrying. I woke up at 5 o'clock. Tessa was already awake beside me, lying on her back with one hand resting on her stomach, eyes open, watching the ceiling. She didn't say anything when she felt me stir, neither did I. We just lay there in the gray pre-dawn of Harper's guest room, listening to the house breathe around us, and understanding without words that today was the last day of a very long chapter of our lives. At 6 o'clock she said, "How do I look?" I turned my head. The bruising on her face had faded from purple to a dull yellow-green over the past 10 days. The stitching on her lip had dissolved. Her eye was fully open again. She was wearing a soft blue dress she'd borrowed from Harper, and her hair was down, and she was looking at me with that steady, undefeated thing in her eyes that I'd been falling in love with all over again every single day since I'd walked into room 412. "You look like the most dangerous thing in the room," I said. She smiled. Small, real. We arrived at Victor's house at 5 o'clock in the evening, 40 minutes before Eliza's timeline. The plan was simple, in the way that only very carefully constructed things get to be simple. Tessa and I walk in, sit down, be present, be calm. Let Victor have his performance. Let the room fill with his witnesses, and then let Sunday dinner become the last supper he ever hosts in that house. Victor's property was a sprawling ranch-style house on 6 acres outside Fort Worth. Big oak trees lining the driveway, a wraparound porch, American flag on a proper pole by the mailbox. The kind of house that looked so solidly decent from the outside, you'd never think to question what happened behind its walls. 12 cars in the driveway when we arrived. Victor met us at the door himself. He had on a pressed Oxford shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a dish towel over one shoulder, like a man who'd been doing the cooking himself. He looked at Tessa the way a man looks at something he owns that has been temporarily misplaced and returned. "Baby girl," he said, opening his arms. Tessa walked into the hug, held it for exactly the right amount of time, pulled back, smiled at her father with a face that gave him absolutely nothing. "Hey, Dad," she said. Inside, the house was full. Extended family I barely knew. Aunts, cousins, a great-uncle in a motorized chair, Pastor Whitfield by the fireplace with a glass of sweet tea, 2 neighbors from down the road, Eliza, Tessa's mother, in the kitchen, moving quietly between the stove and the counter, not making eye contact with anyone. Victor moved through the room like a man at his own coronation, pouring drinks, slapping backs, telling the story of Tessa's accident to people who hadn't heard it yet, his voice riding the perfect frequency of grieving father, concerned patriarch. I watched him work the room and understood for the first time how he'd survived this long. He wasn't just intimidating, he was charming, he was warm, he was the kind of man people wanted to believe. We sat down to dinner at 6 o'clock sharp, Victor at the head, Tessa's mother at the far end, the 6 brothers down one side, Tessa and I across from them. Pastor Whitfield said grace. Long, wandering, grateful. Dishes moved around the table. Conversation filled the room. I looked at my watch. 6:07, Eliza Bryant had filed at exactly 4:30 that afternoon. Criminal complaint, aggravated assault, continuous family violence, felony murder in the case of Ruth Aldridge, recusal motion for Judge Hale filed simultaneously. She'd called me at 4:31 to confirm. "It's done," she'd said. "Detective Mallory has the warrant. He'll move at 6:15. 6:09, Victor was telling a hunting story, something about a buck he'd tracked for 3 days in the hill country. The table was laughing. I watched his face while he talked. The ease of it, the ownership. The absolute certainty of a man who has never once sat at a table where he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. I looked across at Julian. Julian was looking at his plate. 6:12. Tessa's hand found mine under the table. She didn't squeeze it, just rested her fingers on top of mine. Steady. 6:14. Victor set down his fork. looked down the table at Tessa with that particular expression, fond, possessive, the look of a man examining something he considers his. "You know," he said, loud enough for the whole table, "I'm just glad my girl is home. Glad she's safe. Family takes care of family." He raised his glass. "That's what we do." Chairs scraped back slightly as people reached for their glasses. Then headlights swept across the dining room wall, through the front window, then another set, then a third. Victor looked toward the window. The first flicker of something crossed his face. Not fear yet, just confusion. The mild irritation of a man whose moment has been interrupted. The doorbell rang. Nobody moved for a second. Then Victor pushed his chair back with a scrape that cut through the conversation like a blade, tossed his napkin on the plate, and walked toward the front door with a dish towel still on his shoulder. Tessa was looking straight ahead, completely still. Victor opened the front door, and Detective Grant Mallory was standing on the porch in a gray jacket, badge on his belt, 2 uniformed officers behind him, and a folded warrant in his hand that he extended toward Victor, the way you'd hand someone a bill they'd been avoiding for a very long time. "Victor Aldridge," Mallory's voice carried cleanly into the dining room, "I have a warrant for your arrest." The dining room went completely silent. Pastor Whitfield set down his glass. Victor's voice came back through the doorway, lower now, stripped of the warmth, a different register entirely. "There must be some kind of mistake. You need to call my lawyer right now. This is Sir. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." I heard the moment Victor understood. It wasn't a mistake. A very particular silence. The silence of a man who has always believed the walls would hold. Hearing the walls come down. He turned around in the doorway, and the dining room, all 12 people still sitting at that long oak table under the good chandelier with the good china and the half-eaten Sunday dinner, saw his face for the first time without the performance on it. What was underneath was not what anyone expected. It wasn't rage, it wasn't panic. It was something smaller and uglier and more honest than either. It was the face of a man who knew exactly what he'd done and had simply believed he'd never have to answer for it. His eyes went across the room, past the pastor, past the cousins, past his sons, all 6 of them, who had risen slowly from their chairs one by one and were standing now on the same side of the table as Tessa. His eyes landed on Tessa last. She looked back at him, calm, clear, unafraid for the first time in her entire life. The cuffs clicked. Victor's jaw tightened. He straightened his shoulders. And then, even now, even here, he performed. Looked back at the room with something close to dignity assembled on his face, took one slow breath. "You don't know what you've done," he said, not to Mallory, not to the room, to me. I held his eyes, said nothing. Mallory walked him off the porch. The uniformed officers followed. The door stayed open behind them, and the October night air moved through the house for the first time in 30 years. Then Victor's voice came back from the dark of the driveway, carried through the open door across the silent dining room, across the good china and the cold food, and his 12 people who would never be able to unknow what they'd just seen. "I own that, Judge," he called back. "You think this sticks? I'll not, Judge." The door swung slowly shut behind him on its own. The room was absolutely still. Then Julian sat back down in his chair, put his elbows on the table, put his face in his hands, and started crying the way people cry when something that has been pressing on them for their entire lives finally lifts. Tessa's mother stood up from the far end of the table, set her napkin down, straightened her dress, and for the first time in the 40 years I'd known her as a small, quiet woman who never finished a sentence without checking first, she looked up, all the way up, at the whole room, at nothing in particular, and she exhaled. Victor wasn't bluffing. By Monday morning his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Oliver Reese, 3-piece suit, the kind of expensive that announces itself, had filed a motion to have the case assigned specifically to Judge Preston Hale. The filing cited procedural grounds, jurisdictional technicalities, language so dense it was clearly designed to confuse rather than clarify. Eliza called me at 7 o'clock in the morning. "He moved fast," she said. "Does it matter?" "No." A pause. "But I want you to understand what we're walking into today. If Hale isn't recused before noon, Victor walks on a technicality by end of week. His lawyer is good, Mason, very good. So is yours," I said. She almost smiled. I could hear it. By 9 o'clock we were in Eliza's office. She was already at her desk, Morgan beside her, Quentin running documents to the printer in steady, quiet loops. The recusal motion was already filed, had been filed simultaneously with the criminal complaint Sunday afternoon, but Victor's lawyer was contesting it, claiming the motion lacked sufficient grounds, claiming Judge Hale's long friendship with Victor was professional, not personal, and constituted no genuine conflict. Then Eliza made the call. Not to the court, not to Mallory, to Paige Hale. Judge Hale's daughter-in-law answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting by the phone. Eliza put her on speaker. Paige's voice was steady, the steadiness of a woman who had made her decision long before this morning and was simply waiting for someone to open the door. "I'm ready," Paige said. "Tell me what you need. I need you to tell your father-in-law what happened at the hunting property in 2017, Eliza said, "before the court hears it from us. He deserves to hear it from you first." A long silence. "Today?" Paige asked. "Within the hour," Eliza said. The call ended. 43 minutes later, Judge Preston Hale filed a voluntary recusal from the case. No contest, no explanation beyond a single line citing personal conflict of interest. Oliver Reese called Eliza's office 12 minutes after that, his voice, for the first time, missing its earlier certainty. By noon, Judge Amelia Whitcomb had been assigned. Eliza set her phone face down on the desk and looked across at me. "Victor just lost the only friend he had in that courthouse," she said quietly. I thought about Paige Hale sitting somewhere making that phone call to her father-in-law, telling him the truth about a weekend he'd invited his old friend to. Watching one man's illusion of another man collapse in real time over the phone. Quiet courage. The kind that doesn't make the news. The kind that changes everything anyway. The trial lasted 19 days. I know because I counted every single one. Not the way you count down to something good, the way you count through something hard. One day at a time, one breath at a time, one morning of sitting in that courtroom behind the prosecution table, watching Eliza Bryant dismantle 30 years of Victor Aldridge's carefully constructed world piece by documented piece in front of 12 strangers who had no reason to protect him. The courtroom was wood-paneled and fluorescent lit and smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. Judge Amelia Whitcomb ran it the way Eliza had described. Precise, patient, and completely unmoved by Oliver Reese's considerable talent for theater. Every time Reese tried to redirect, reframe, or recharacterize, Whitcomb looked at him over her reading glasses with an expression that said she had seen that particular trick performed by better men and had not been impressed then either. Tessa testified on day 7. She walked to the stand in a simple navy dress, 31 weeks pregnant. The last trace of bruising finally gone from her face. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, folded her hands on the railing in front of her, and told the truth for 2 hours and 40 minutes without once looking at her father. She didn't need to. Her voice was enough. She described the first time it happened. She was 9 years old. She described the way the family learned to read his moods the way sailors read weather. The particular quality of silence at dinner that meant tonight would be bad. The way his truck's headlights hitting the kitchen window would send everyone into a kind of collective breath-holding that nobody ever named out loud. She described the recordings, the storage unit, the envelope with my name on it. She described building a case while pregnant, alone in the house with a man who had already killed one woman. Because she understood that running would only delay him, and documentation was the only weapon she had. She spoke about Ruth. About finding that death certificate at 17. About carrying it in silence for 14 years, about going back for the recorder, that small battered digital recorder with 4 minutes and 11 seconds of audio on it, and understanding that some evidence is worth more than your own safety to retrieve. The courtroom fell completely silent when she concluded. Eliza wrapped up the prosecution's case on day 14. Oliver Reese called Victor to the stand on day 15. It was, I understood later, an error, but one that made sense. Victor had talked his way out of everything for 30 years. Reese trusted the act would hold up once more. It failed. Eliza cross-examined him across 4 hours. She never once raised her tone. She didn't have to. She simply posed questions, plain, calm, precise questions, and let Victor's own words construct the walls closing in around him. By the 3rd hour, he was disputing statements he'd given in the first. By the 4th, he'd stopped meeting the jury's eyes altogether. The jury took 6 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty across every charge. Aggravated assault with serious bodily injury. continuous family violence. Felony murder in Ruth Aldrich's death. Judge Whitcomb delivered his sentence on a Thursday morning in late November. The courtroom was packed. Family, journalists, women from the county victor had spent decades diminishing and dismissing. Eliza sat at the prosecutor's table, hands clasped together. Tessa sat next to me in the gallery, 34 weeks pregnant. Ivy pushing firmly against her ribs the way she'd been for the last 2 weeks, like she couldn't wait to arrive. Judge Whitcomb studied Victor over her reading glasses for a lengthy moment before speaking. He remained upright. Even now, even here. The act was the final thing to crumble. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "you've spent nearly 4 decades believing that those closest to you existed purely for your benefit. That love was simply a tool for control. That family meant possession." She stopped. "This court rejects that. 40 years. No chance of parole." The gavel struck. The sound rippled through the room like a stone hitting still water, spreading outward in circles, reaching everything. Someone behind me let out a breath, long, trembling, years in the making. I glanced back and saw Tessa's mother, Eliza, small and quiet, seated 3 rows behind us, hands folded in her lap and her eyes shut. Her face doing something I'd never witnessed in 4 years of knowing her. Relaxing. Simply relaxing. For the first time, Julian sat beside her. His arm wrapped around her shoulders and he stared upward, blinking rapidly, the way men do when holding something back behind their eyes. We drove home in the early afternoon sunlight, that soft November glow that makes everything resemble the final scene of something. Tessa kept her hand on her belly, head resting against the window, silent, but humming, barely there, something gentle and wordless, and completely hers. Ivy arrived on a Tuesday, 6 days after, 7 pounds, 2 ounce. Lungs that made her presence known to the entire maternity ward instantly and passionately. Dark hair, matching Tessa's. My nose, according to Tessa, which I decided to accept as praise. She entered the world flushed and enraged and utterly flawless. And when the nurse placed her on Tessa's chest, and Tessa gazed down at her for the very first time, she made that same sound again. The one from the hospital room. The one beneath language. The one from somewhere words can't reach. I stood beside that bed with a hand on each of them, my wife and my daughter, and thought back to a voicemail I'd gotten at 30,000 feet, 22 seconds. A thud, a whisper. A man's voice behind it, doing what men like him always do when they think no one powerful is watching. He never anticipated Tessa, none of them ever do. We relocated to Oregon that spring, a small town near Eugene, green and damp and peaceful, in a way that felt like the total opposite of everything we were escaping. A house with a porch and a yard and a neighborhood where no one recognized the name Victor Aldrich. Julian came to visit first, 3 weeks after we settled in. He sat with me on the porch that evening, while Tessa put Ivy down inside. We didn't say much, just watched the light fade over the tree line. Before leaving, he murmured, almost to himself, "I feel like I can actually breathe here." "Yeah," I said, "same here." The 6 brothers healed gradually. Therapy, space, honesty, the difficult work of rediscovering who they were outside the mold their father had forced them into. Blake launched a foundation supporting domestic violence survivors. Hunter relocated his family to Colorado. The rest found their own paths back to themselves, flawed and continuing, the way recovery always unfolds. Eliza, Tessa's mother, sold the ranch and moved into a small apartment in Austin, close to her sister. She called Tessa every Sunday at 9 a.m. They spoke for an hour, every time. Simple things, recipes, Ivy's antics, the weather. The everyday exchanges between a mother and daughter who'd lost decades of them and were now quietly, persistently reclaiming each one. On Ivy's first birthday, I grilled in the backyard while Tessa sat on a chair in the grass with Ivy in her lap, letting her daughter reach for the grass and the breeze and everything the world offered her curious little hands. I watched them from the grill, the afternoon sun on their faces, the way Tessa laughed when Ivy tugged her hair and refused to release it. Later, after the cake and after Ivy had drifted off and the yard grew quiet, Tessa joined me on the porch. The Oregon evening was crisp and green and smelled of rain that had already come and gone. She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arm around her, and we stood there gazing at nothing specific. "He told me once," she said softly, "that I was too much, too emotional, too complicated, too difficult to love." She paused. He said no one would ever choose me if they truly knew me. I stayed silent. I keep thinking about Ivy, she continued. About what I want her to understand. About what I want her to hold on to. She grew quiet for a moment. I want her to know she isn't too much. I want her to know the right people will always choose her. I want her to know that gentleness isn't weakness. That building something silently doesn't mean nothing's being built. She lifted her face toward mine. That's what I want her to know. I looked at my wife, at the woman who had concealed a recorder in her father's house at 30 years old, who had logged 61 voice memos under grocery lists, who had assembled a case while pregnant, and terrified, and utterly alone, and had passed it to me in a hospital room, alongside a brass key, a photograph, and 22 months of remarkable, silent, courageous defiance. She will, I said, because she has you. Tessa remained quiet for a long stretch. Then she said gently, almost as if thinking aloud, he never broke me, he only postponed me. The porch stayed still, the trees swayed faintly in the night air. Somewhere within the house, our daughter breathed in the darkness, safe, complete, entirely unaware that the world she'd entered had been made safer for her, one document at a time, by a woman who refused to shrink. That's the nature of quiet courage. It doesn't announce itself. It needs no audience. It simply keeps building slowly, carefully in the shadows, until the walls rise and the door swings open, and something never meant to endure, endures regardless. And that's precisely what they accomplished. And now I want to ask you something truly, from the heart of this story. Tessa carried this alone for 22 months, 61 recordings, a brass key, a sealed envelope she prayed she'd never need to open, and she managed all of it, while nurturing the life growing within her. So tell me, what kind of strength does that demand? And do you know someone in your life who has carried something this heavy, this silently, for this long? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and while you're at it, tell me where in the world you're watching from, your city, your country. I want to know who's out here experiencing these stories alongside me. Also, share what kind of stories affect you most. Betrayal, quiet vengeance, family secrets, emotional recovery, a love that endured the impossible. Whatever you share, that's exactly what I'll deliver next. These stories exist because of all of you, and I want to ensure every single one lands exactly where it's needed. If this story lingered with you, if any part of it felt genuine, felt close, felt like something you needed to hear, hit that like button and subscribe to Metal Truth Daily. Every story here is crafted for the people who understand that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way out. Take care of yourselves out there. Be gentle with the quiet people around you. You never know what they're building. We'll meet again next time. Until then, stay strong, stay genuine, and keep your heart open.
वो देखो हाँ जी हाँ जी चलो चलो ये देखो वीडियो बना ले फिर चलते हैं वो देखो कितनी चूचू हैं वो देखो अंडे उसके सेब ये क्या है सेब इधर देखो अंडे दिए हुए हैं उसने देख लो वो अंडे कर लो उबाल के खाओगे
इतने बड़े मारे लग रहे मेरे नाम से इनकी आंखें इसके बाल
भूखे हैं कुछ डाला ही नहीं हुआ इनको
इसके पंजे देखो एक ही पैर दो हैं इनके सिर्फ हाँ? तीन नहीं होते इसके बाल देखो कैसे थे।
हाँ लग रहा है कोट पहना हुआ है जैसे बहुत
वो बाकी सारे थोड़े ब्राउन ब्राउन है ना, ये ब्लैक।
ये क्या है
ये देखो।
इधर?
ओ हाथ नहीं लगा, हाथ
ये क्या है सेब?